I request Professor Lekhan.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Professor Patel, for this opportunity to chair this session. First of all, I would invite Professor John Clammer to present his paper. The paper's title is The Search for Truth, Satyagraha, Wittgenstein and Gandhi. We have 20 minutes and 5 minutes. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Happy to fill the breach and create a little time tomorrow. Although I must say there is quite a lot of convergence, I think, between the papers that were originally scheduled for tomorrow. So hopefully we'll bear that in mind. Professor Das is also speaking today. I will comment on your paper too. I think there's a lot of common ground, actually. Tomorrow. Oh, well, then I don't have time to do one thing today. Right? So I think you have a copy of the paper, but I will basically read it and try to simplify some of the bits in between to save time, so that we have maximum time for the rest of the afternoon. So let me start by reading the first part anyway. The tale is oft repeated that when finally Wittgenstein met with the members of the Vienna Circle, instead of immediately regaling them with an account of his philosophy, he read them poems by Rabindranath Tagore. I'm sure you all know the story. That famous incident can be read in many ways as a kind of Zen moment in which Wittgenstein subverted the quite natural expectations of his audience of logicians and mathematicians, as an ironical comment on his own conclusions about the role of philosophy that he had reached by the end of the Tractatus, as signaling a love of poetry, and particularly that of Tagore, who was immensely popular in German-speaking Europe in the 1920s. In fact, visited Germany twice. I don't think he made it to Austria, but he certainly visited Germany on at least 2 occasions. Heard his plays performed there, in fact, in German translation. And perhaps this was also a subtle indication of Wittgenstein's affinity with some strands of Asian thinking. Wittgenstein not only knew Tagore's poetry, but with his friend Yorick Smithies had translated and adapted the second act of Tagore's play, The King of the Dark Castle. But perhaps the best conclusion is the ironical one. We can argue about this afterwards if you like. On meeting the luminaries of Viennese logic, mathematics, and philosophy of language, Wittgenstein pointed beyond philosophy to the depths of poetic language. For you all know the famous proposition at the end of the Tractatus about the ladder and silence, all that stuff, right? I don't return that. What we cannot speak of, we must pass over in silence, or perhaps in poetry. But does this in itself constitute a serious interest in Asian modes of thought? And I would say hardly, since only a few places, if any, in the entire corpus of Wittgenstein that I'm aware of, does it explicitly refer to Asian philosophy, literature, history, or religion. Is it then worth pursuing this theme at all? Maybe it's a false start. I will try to show that it is worth pursuing this theme, and as Professor Pankis points out, a number of scholars have in fact taken up this kind of affinity and at least have attempted to find parallels of some kind. Ray Monk, in his magisterial biography of Wittgenstein, suggests furthermore that Tagore embodies Wittgenstein's views on religious belief, albeit expressed in poetic and dramatic language rather than formal philosophy. Now, in the paper, I want to take a slightly different approach at what may seem at first sight a fruitless one, talking about the affinity between Wittgenstein and Gandhi. The two certainly never met, and our philosopher, however, would almost certainly know of Gandhi, who would have been very difficult to miss in the political turmoil and anti-colonial struggles of the 1920s to 1940s, and their reverberations in London, if not in Cambridge. And Cambridge not really far. And I noticed in a couple of the other papers, people reported this famous incident where he advised his student, K.J. Shah, to give up philosophy and return to India, adhere to Gandhi. Does anybody ever know what happened to him? I often wondered what happened to Mr. Shah Whether he took this advice, I don't know. Disappeared into the mist of history. Excuse me. Furthermore, Wittgenstein is hardly considered a major political or social philosopher, or even one interested in the philosophy of history. While Gandhi, of course, is an exemplary case of an intensely political thinker, even if not considered a philosopher in any technical or professional sense. I will argue here, however, that a dialogue is possible between these two towering thinkers, in particular around the two major themes that occupy them both, notably the nature of truth and the place of religion in their total worldview. And I will argue that that dialogue perhaps is fruitfully expanded. The thought of both may grow in our philosophy if we're aware of this fact. Okay, as again you know, a number of you have quoted, Wittgenstein is reported as having said to his friend Rory, "I am not a religious man, but I cannot help seeing every problem from a religious point of view." Gandhi, for his part, is well known to express the conviction that for him all problems were, in the broadest sense, related to religion. Wittgenstein's comment to Drury would then have to be modified somewhat to fit Gandhi. The first phrase, "I am not a religious man," would have to go, but the second would very much be uttered by Gandhi himself. This consideration raised a host of questions related to both thinkers, their views on the nature of religious belief and practice, their understanding of the concept of spirituality, and the role of mysticism in their thinking and lives. While, of course, Gandhi remained a Hindu throughout his life, he, like Wittgenstein, was profoundly influenced by Christianity, especially as filtered through the works of Tolstoy, an important link between the two thinkers. Certainly this common interest in the relationship of both to Tagore, in Wittgenstein's case through his poetry and plays, in Gandhi's case through a close personal, if somewhat antagonistic relationship, provides another link and goes a long way to undermine the conception, now fortunately being abandoned, I think, in most Wittgensteinian scholarship, of Wittgenstein being a logical positivist. The sociology of philosophy, however, and I want to stress this point too, philosophers, we don't often talk about the social context in which philosophy is generated. Hans Luger, in his study of Wittgenstein's life and work, argues that the philosopher should not be read in purely abstract or decontextualized terms, but very much in the historical and political conditions from which his work emerged. Luger suggests that these conditions do not only relate to the turn-of-the-century cultural ferment of Vienna and the place of the wealthy and multi-talented Wittgenstein family within it, and their major links to figures in music, architecture, painting, literature, and other fields, but perhaps more importantly to the broader social and political turmoil that accompanied Wittgenstein's life. The First World War, in which he served, the Great Depression, the Second World War, and the post-war austerity which we would experience in Cambridge after the war. Furthermore, during his years in England, he was intimately connected with the great philosophical minds of the period, during a highly creative period in British philosophy, including, of course, G.E. Moore and his one-time mentor, Bertrand Russell, and was surrounded by other major literary and political figures, such as the economist John Maynard Keynes, and in fact many others who constituted the intellectual life of Cambridge at that time. In this situation, Luger describes Wittgenstein as what he calls a situated man, a man at the crossroads. And while he certainly does not engage in any kind of crude sociological determinism, he does suggest that Wittgenstein's thought as a whole should be read as a subtle critique of Western civilization, which, having personally lived through some of its most brutal manifestations, he was not entirely enamored. I want to stress this point because I know a number of you have also talked about Wittgenstein's critique of Western civilization without particularly raising the question of why he might have been such a critique that may or may not be related in any organic way to his philosophy as such. Now, others have mentioned, have gone into much the same kind of discussion. There's a well-known book, or I think it's a well-known book by Anna Yannick and Stephen Tolbin, for example, about Wittgenstein's place in the early years of the century, 20th century, in Vienna, a place that was indeed undergoing enormous social political change itself, and was indeed a place of huge artistic, philosophical, linguistic, and other philosophical, mathematical ferment at the time. So I'll cut this bit out in the interest of time. parallel with Gandhi can be seen clearly here in Wittgenstein's position that ethics is taught not through some kind of moral argument or propaganda, but by example. The latter's attraction to Tolstoy, Wittgenstein's attraction to Tolstoy's undogmatic interpretation of Christianity, is clear from his admiration of the Russian thinker's 23 Tales, in which what true religion is through showing it in practice, how the truly religious life is lived. This is not an irrational process. Subjective truth is realized by indirect means, through poetry, myth, and stories, and of course through experience. The abstract question of the meaning of life is the abstract question of the meaning of life is thus a pointless one. The truth of life can only be realized by living it. This principle is even extended by Wittgenstein to his ideas on design and architecture, realized in a house that he planned and supervised for his sister Margareta, and its elimination of all decoration unnecessarily detailed. I've written about this. If you want to read more about this, there's an essay by me in the very colourful Wittgenstein volume that you have bought to purchase outside. Okay. But which one of the few writers who've written about Wittgenstein as an architect. And by the way, Wittgenstein at one point had himself listed in the Vienna city directory as an architect. Interesting. Look at Wittgenstein, architect, not philosopher. One of the commentators on this, Paul Bielefeld, has argued that Wittgenstein's ideas on design and simplicity aimed at moral relief from the wickedness of everyday life. Simplicity was for him as much a moral as an aesthetic tool. Simplicity of lifestyle, centrality of ethics concerned with the spiritual, whether defined as religion or mysticism as the ground of action, including political action, at the very least constitutes a kind of family resemblance between Gandhi and Wittgenstein. But we can, however, construct a further basis for comparison if we turn to their views on truth. Now, Wittgenstein, in fact, rarely seems to use the word truth. He seemed to prefer the term certainty, which has obviously substantially different connotations. Whereas Gandhi's notion of truth was rooted in an essentially religious worldview, Wittgenstein was always reticent about any transcendental sources or basis for his views of reality. The thrust of uncertainty is that not the only respectable philosophical position is skepticism, rather that we as a species are psychologically unable to doubt everything. That we need to consider some at least of our beliefs as certain, otherwise many of our language games would fail, even if they may not express indisputable truths. And again, in his book, Wittgenstein, Hans Luca puts it rather nicely. It says, all philosophical argumentation must come to an end, but its end is not self-evident truth. It is rather the certainty of our natural practices. This accords entirely with his early view, clearly expressed in the Tractatus, that philosophy is not a body of doctrine, but an activity, which a view I think he never changed. Living his own life in a world in turmoil, and having evidently read Oswald Spengler's influential volume, Decline of the West, which I think will be discussed by Professor Daffett in more detail tomorrow, the willingness to see either certainty or indeed truth as absolutes makes deal of sociological and historical sense. Living through an era in which few certainties held. In 1930, not long after the appearance of Spengler's book, Wittgenstein wrote, our civilization is characterized by the word progress. Typically it constructs, it is occupied with building an ever more complicated structure, and even clarity is sought only as a means to this end, not as an end in itself. For me, on the contrary, clarity, perspicuity are valuable in themselves. And a few pages earlier, he comments that the spirit of American and European civilization was, to quote him, alien and uncongenial to him, and he could not understand its goals, if it has any. Wittgenstein's notion of therapy thus in fact has political dimensions. This may not be immediately evident. The analysis of political language is crucial in a world where Orwellian newspeak is pervasive. In fact, one wonders what Wittgenstein would have made of notions like post-truth or alternative truth, in the age of Trump. I think that's to know. In ancient Chinese philosophy, one spoke of the rectification of names, and certainly we can see Wittgenstein engaged in the same eternal project. It is true that it is evident that he was temperamentally not a political animal, and certainly made no steps to translate his philosophy into political action, as did his erstwhile mentor Bertrand Russell, who in the end more or less gave up philosophy for politics. But nevertheless, his philosophy has political implications. Certainly more work, I think, needs to be done to this end, and I commented here again in the shortness of time, and I then discussed ideas from his famous lecture on ethics, which I think also point to, in fact, political implications. Marx, of course, thought the role of philosophy was to change the world, not only to interpret it. Wittgenstein clearly took another tack. The clear implication of his work is that political language is as much liable to subjection to close analysis as any other form of language, and indeed perhaps more so, given its pervasiveness and its subtle and not so subtle influences on our subjectivities, social, moral attitudes, and worldviews. If the aim of philosophy is to show the fly in the way of a fly bottle, this is the very sphere of political language, where people can be helped to deconstruct the ideological formations and beliefs that politicians would like to encourage in us. After all, in the somewhat unlikely context of his remarks on the foundations of mathematics, Wittgenstein wrote that what he called the sickness of a time can only be addressed through, again I quote him, alteration in the modes of life of human beings, and that the sickness of philosophical problems only through a change of mode of thought and life, not through a medicine invented by an individual. And like Marx, Wittgenstein was not willing to offer himself as such an individual. So it's only by implication that we can see the outlines of what this new form of life might possibly look like. How much time do I have now? 5 minutes? 5 minutes. So when we turn to Gandhi, we're going to find a very different conception of truth and the nature of the relationship between his thought and political action, which I think I will try to very much summarize this by making just 2 or 3 points. Many of us are very aware of course, the much repeated, the original letter came from a letter he wrote from Yarapta Central Prison in Pune, or Pune as it then was, right, to the inmates of the Sabarati Ashram, which of course he set out his famous definition of the nature of truth, and the notion that it's more accurate to say not that truth is God, but that God is truth. And he goes on to link this, of course, to his famous, his only notion of Satchit Ananda, relationship between truth, knowledge, and bliss. So I will put this in, probably very familiar to all of you here. Here we see an unashamedly theistic conception of truth, upon which elsewhere Gandhi relates to non-violence, which he sees as included in his notion of truth. And it's related to his conception of moksha, which in another letter, printed in his journal Harijan in February 1942, he finds as the liberation from impure thought. This austerity extends to all areas of life, including the prohibition on lying. And I have to tell you this little anecdote from Gandhi in case you've never come across it. Gandhi comments on a statement by Bertrand Russell, who out walking one day saw an exhausted and terrified fox. Nobody knows the story. If you don't, everyone knows. And shortly after, the huntsmen and their dogs in pursuit of the fox. When asked by the huntsman if he had seen the fox, Russell answered that indeed he had, but it had run off in a direction quite different from the one which the huntsman was pursuing him. Okay? Russell then states he thought this was the correct thing to do, no doubt saving the life of the unfortunate fox. Gandhi, however, scolds him, saying, truth admits of no exceptions. And probably Russell should have done the Wittgensteinian thing and have simply refused to answer the question. So I don't know if Gandhi was an animal activist. It probably doesn't sound like it, doesn't it? Anyway, okay. We're not told, unfortunately, if Russell was out walking with Wittgenstein at the time, whether he was or not. It would be nice to know if he had beaten him again, but anyway, it's done. So, we can certainly intuit from a broad reading of Gandhi's writings speeches that certainty does indeed exist, but not as an abstract or philosophical concept, but as a form of knowledge obtained from practice. And that practice defined as the single-minded pursuit of truth, not only as an intellectual quest, but as expressed and embodied in lifestyle. So, here we see that while open, at least the theistic conception of truth has no place in Wittgenstein's philosophy, there are remarkable parallels to the practice of the two thinkers, not only the single-minded pursuit of truth, but a highly ethically formed and indeed austere lifestyle expressed itself in a quest for simplicity and absolute personal authenticity. Then I go on to talk about, actually I've cut this bit out piece of time, about Gandhi's theory of the Purusharthas and his relationship between, obviously, moksha as the goal and his political thinking, which in fact defines in some places as indeed artha, and of course the nature of dharma. Elsewhere, I pointed out in other things that I've written, because I work a lot in aesthetics, that of course he doesn't talk about much about karma, but that's another story about Gandhi's relationship to art. Is another story. Okay. So let me try to bring this to a conclusion there. While there's certainly practical truths that make up the fabric of everyday life, ultimately, for Gandhi, truth is to be understood as derivation from the Sanskrit term sat, which means actually ultimate reality. And the well-known verse that from the unreal leaping to the real, from darkness leaping to the light, from death leaping to immortality, which is both included in the ashram hymnal that Gandhi put together for his devotees, and was part of Gandhi's own daily prayer practice. So we have a lot of philosophical differences, okay? But religious differences. So let me suggest in conclusion then, two things, very briefly. The first is, and hopefully this will be developed much further by my co-speakers tomorrow, is that engaged in both of their work is indeed a profound critique of the notion of civilization. What I've tried to do here, and happy to expand, sorry, in the paper, please ask me about this if you'd like to, was to draw attention to the historical context in which both thinkers express that hostility to civilization, or to Western civilization specifically. Was in fact the traumatic years through which Wittgenstein himself lived, for which he didn't comment very much in his own writing and thinking, but which he experienced firsthand. He was a soldier in the trenches of the First World War on the losing side. The Austrians are very nice people, but they always make bad political choices. They always join the wrong side. They did again in 1945, but that's another story. Okay. Well, not another story, because of course Wittgenstein's own family was caught up in the Nazi purge of Jews. Okay. And for Gandhi, of course, who hardly needs defending as a critic of civilization, was living his life initially in the context of the racist colonialism of South Africa, and subsequently until only, he only lived to see 1 year of Indian independence under a period of colonialism, effectively until the end of his life. What I'm suggesting here then is not that we find any published links, as it were, between the two, but again, to draw in a very loose sense on this term of a family resemblance, remarkable parallels in the way in which they both approach the world. And suggesting that way also, I think, perhaps helps us in a rereading of Wittgenstein. Because what I'm suggesting here is that the best way to read Wittgenstein, and perhaps we will do this already, is what here I call open reading. Someone whose thought is constantly subject to rethinking in the context of our new situation, and therefore is, if not timeless, at least long outlasted the life of its author. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very great.
Comment on Professor John Clammer. I've been staying with Professor John Clammer for the past 2 days. We are sharing the room, and I'm very happy to be with you. But on academic matters, I want to be open. Professor John Clammer, if my observations of unpalatable in a way, kindly excuse me. I have to congratulate you, Professor John Clammer, for presenting very inquisitive paper comparing Wittgenstein and John. I enjoyed of reading it, Professor John has argued that both Gandhi and Wittgenstein were truth seekers. Truth plays a dominant place in their writings. He observes that Wittgenstein rarely used the word truth in his work, as he preferred the term certainty in the place of truth. Professor John's paper starts with describing the anecdote when Wittgenstein read the poems of Tagore when he joined the members of the Vienna Circle to give an account of his philosophy. Thus, the author of this essay described Wittgenstein's love for Tagore's poetry and drama. The influence of Tolstoy on both Wittgenstein and Gandhi was given. It was said that Tolstoy was an important link between them. It is told that ethics lies at the heart of Wittgenstein's total project. His views on aesthetics and religion are not subjected to the test of validity as that of science. The other argues that, like that of Gandhi, Wittgenstein argued that ethics is to be taught not through some moral argument or propaganda, but by example. Professor John explores the family resemblance between Gandhi and Wittgenstein and said that simplicity of life, ethics and spirituality constitute a family resemblance between them. In the course of discussion, John brought out a criticism of Gandhi and Wittgenstein on Western civilization. The author's reference to Gandhi's statement that truth-telling has no exception and scolding Russell when he lied in saving the life of a terrified fox is interesting. While discussing the notion of truth in Gandhian thought, Professor John observed that Gandhi initially said that God is truth, but subsequently changed his view and said that truth is God. But John did not explain why such change took place in Gandhi's life. I feel that an explanation behind such a change is missing in the paper. It is to be noted that after claiming that God is truth, Gandhi had realized that atheists do not believe in God. However, they cannot deny truth. Therefore, in order to arrive at a uniform formula acceptable to both atheists and theists, Gandhi revised his position and said that truth is God. This is the transition from theistic position to moralistic conception of God. This transition Gandhi arrived at after relentless search and experiments for truth. This position needs to be clearly stated by the author in his essay. I believe that Professor John considers Gandhi's conception of truth is theistic. Thus he writes on page 8 of his essay, here theistic conception of truth, one with elsewhere Gandhi relates to non-violence. But as I explained earlier, Gandhi's conception of truth is moralistic rather than theistic. Gandhi gives importance to both religion and morality, but if there is a conflict between them, Gandhi prefers morality over religion. My main problem with Professor John's essay is about the very title of it. Professor John is of the view that because Wittgenstein and Gandhi were the seekers of truth, they were also the seekers of satyagraha. This is the reason why he has titled his paper as The Search for Truth, Satyagraha in Wittgenstein and Gandhi. From the very title of the paper, I expected that John would throw light upon various satyagrahas that Gandhi undertook in South Africa and India and in India, and a parallel discussion from Wittgenstein's point of view. But nothing such is found in his paper. He argued throughout his paper that Wittgenstein and Gandhi were the truth seekers and lovers of moral living. No detailed discussion on satyagraha is found. I wish to argue that satya and satyagraha are different notions. Satya is truth. Satyagraha is according to truth. Satyagraha was originally called sabagraha. Here the term sabha means good. The term sabagraha was suggested by Gandhi's nephew. Subsequently, Gandhi had changed it into satyagraha. It is a method Gandhi adopted in South Africa and subsequently in British India in order to resolve political conflicts. Satyagraha for Gandhi is truth force and love force. But Gandhi applied it as a political weapon in South Africa against racial discrimination. He has applied it in British India against British yoke. Some such satyagraha movements Gandhi took are Kheda Satyagraha, Bartoli Satyagraha, Salt Satyagraha, etc. Gandhi applied Satyagraha as a non-violent weapon against the injustice in political, economic and social situations. In Satyagraha, Gandhi fought against evil. There are different forms of Satyagraha like dialogue, sending petitions, non-cooperation, strike, picketing, fasting, etc. Gandhi applied the non-violent weapon of Satyagraha as a tool to resolve conflicts, but this is not found in Wittgenstein's life. Like Gandhi, he was in search of truth, but he did not apply it to resolve any conflicts, either social or political. He did not use it as a method of conflict resolution. What are the conflicts that Wittgenstein resolved using Satyagraha? I do not know. My point is that because Wittgenstein, like Gandhi, is a seeker of the truth, we cannot argue that he is a practitioner of Satyagraha. With these few observations on Professor John Clammer, I once again congratulate him for his thoughtful paper.
Thank you.
Shall we take questions?
Yeah.
So, one question.
Hello. Yes, it was really an interesting paper. In my understanding of Wittgenstein and Gandhi, it's a very small question, and I hope it does make a sense to you. In Gandhi, we see when he switched truth and God with these two terms, we can say that the truth is like the metaphysical God, and God seems to be the metaphysical truth. And this is how this metaphysics we see in Gandhi. Whereas the metaphysical God and the metaphysical truth both seem to be unexplored or unexposed in Wittgenstein. Understand? Now, how do you see the parallels? Because the the title of your paper is that In Search of Truth. Whereas what kind of truth is being searched by Wittgenstein, parallelly or in connection to Gandhi? Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Professor John, you presented a wonderful unity of the thought on Satyagraha, Wittgenstein and Gandhi. So I enjoyed it a lot. This is one of the papers that I could afford to listen. Only two thoughts come to my mind. One is when you were talking about the force. Basically, I thought that Gandhi, when you talked about that, Gandhi was not an activist from that perspective. Because once, like in the context of truth, he talked about, and Gandhi basically, I think Samajdev sir can correct me, that was the thing. Like in his biography, Gandhi himself says that once he basically ordered for the killing of calf because he was troubled with kind of pain, to a severe pain. So he basically went for that killing of the fox. So I think he also said that Gandhi would rather go with the truth and not go with the non-truth of telling the hunter not to go to the other side. So this is the one which I found it very relevant in your paper, and which goes to the deeper essence of the thoughts of Gandhi and Wittgenstein to some extent. And so far as Satyagraha is concerned, secondly, I was just reflecting that though when we get a topic like this, that means that we are not going into actually looking at Satyagraha in Gandhi, in Wittgenstein, because Wittgenstein had not gone for any such kind of program, political program. But then yes, philosophy we can reflect on that, and we can go into kind of conceptualization, the essence of Satyagraha we can redefine in Gandhi, and then we can find that, in other words, Wittgenstein that one comes to me in my mind, and that is that was quite famous about Wittgenstein. One intentionally he will lie to someone in daytime. Evening time he will go to the person and say that evening time he will go to person and say that I basically did commit a blunder and please forgive me. So that I think if you could comment on this, that is this gesture of Wittgenstein is sticking to the truth, to the ultimate kind of thing, where even if he unintentionally spoke something and later on realized that this was the sin I committed, that was not my intention, then he didn't forgive himself but went to the person and asked him for forgiveness from the person. Who could be more truthful to the humanity than Wittgenstein himself, isn't it? So this is, I think that if this clue is taken, then we can have kind of more depth analysis of Satyagraha in Wittgenstein himself.
Mine is a small clarificatory request. See, you said in the course of delivery, clarity is end in itself, whereas, the other things could be means, etc. This particular sentence, especially when I put it in the context where philosophical problems arise because of the unclarity or ambiguity in language, both in Tractatus, later works, investigation included. Now, if philosophical problem arises because of misunderstanding or confusion about language, then is it not the case that clarity will resolve the problem or solve the problem, and hence it becomes means? Why do you think Wittgenstein held clarity is an end in itself? Clarity for the sake of
quotation from Wittgenstein.
Yeah?
As a quotation from Wittgenstein.
Right.
Professor, any more? Professor,
Sir, just two observations and a question. Actually, one is an extension of the concept raised by the previous speaker. That is a concept of truth. As far as the comparison between Gandhi and Wittgenstein are concerned, that is his concern, to me that Gandhi is a bona fide truth seeker. Okay. So truth is so genesis to Gandhi, but Wittgenstein is not a bona fide truth seeker. Later on, that is Professor Pandey also raised. Okay, so he realized that he is also a truth seeker. This is one observation. And as far as the metaphysical concept of truth and metaphysical concept of God, Wittgenstein repeatedly asserts that I am not doing metaphysics. Okay, I am not doing metaphysics. So if Gandhi was doing metaphysics and Wittgenstein himself confessed, even though among the Wittgensteinians there is a serious debate whether Wittgenstein was a metaphysician or not, but Wittgenstein's own confession is that I am not a metaphysician. Okay, this is another observation of how do you cope with this situation. And the other observation is that the term is architect is a very beautiful linguistic token. That is, Wittgenstein says that I am not doing philosophy. I am not, particularly in the later Wittgenstein, that is, I am not formulating theory. I am not formulating doctrine, because theory or doctrine, whatever it may be, it has beginning and also it has an end. But I am doing neither, I am not theorizing, I am not formulating doctrine, rather than I am just like an architect. Okay. Do you think that the term architect is potentially use in the sense of creativity. That is what I am telling you. These are the two observations.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much, my dear commentator and roommate, and the rest of you for your comments. I think the papers work because the whole point of the paper was to open up a discussion. Okay, and I think from your comments, I would, if I can answer them more in detail, would say basically two things. The first thing was that part of the idea was to promote the very discussion that you've now provided, both in terms of clarifying something here, but also of suggesting that when the question is posed a little bit in this way, interesting thoughts arise, including this question, perhaps you've just ended on, the question of creativity, right? That makes me think of a number of things. Sorry if I not asked you a question directly that I grouped together. I mean, if one read, and I don't know if anybody has read Wittgenstein as a writer, not as a philosopher, what I think would find interesting things, not only saying his architectural work, his brief foray into what the only house he ever designed, right? And the only sculpture he ever made, he made around the same time, the only known piece of art. Unlike Tagore, for example, who took up painting, as you know, late in life in the 60s, Wittgenstein never seemed to have moved in that direction. But I would perhaps like to think of his whole project as a kind of writing project, as writing the world. And in the sense not of knowing the end of that process, but exploring that process through the process of writing itself. Does that make any sense? Don't you? So I would like to pose this paper back in a sense in that spirit. I haven't raised that question specifically here. So I would say two things. First of all, thank you very much, all of you, for the very precise points you've made, which I would obviously want to reconsider in detail in expanding and rewriting the paper. Since we only get 15 minutes to present it, I've learned from long conference presentations, give the short paper first, and then write the long one after you've got the comments. And so I'm very grateful to you all for those kind of comments. If I just say one or two very brief things in response to a couple of specific points. It seems to me that in a way Wittgenstein's project is the pursuit of truth. It's the pursuit of a knowledge about what we can know about the world. Not truth in the sense of, if you like, a religious truth, where there is a doctrine which is to be grasped, because as Professor Baxter just said, that is not the project at all. Professor Baxter just said it's not an attempt to create a set of doctrines, and Wittgenstein, in many places we know, specifically denies that as having to do with his project. Okay? That's one aspect. The question of clarity, therefore, I think comes up actually in that context, that quotation from Wittgenstein. I think what it refers to is indeed, if one takes Wittgenstein's general analysis of language and applies it to political language, something which would be well worth doing at the moment, I think it would be a very profound tool for uncovering the confusions, the mythologies, the half-truths, the ideology which is embodied in a great deal of political language. In that sense, clarity is of course important because it would point back to, in that case, political truth, what we're being told by our politicians, and whether that in fact accords with our other knowledge of the world. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all very much.